Good morning, and welcome to the Africa Weekly Talk. Today's subject on the docket is Ecowas, the 15-member economic community of West African states, which was founded through the Lagos Treaty in 1975, is now disintegrating very fast, right in front of our own eyes. And this has to do with the three countries in the Sahel region, which decided to withdraw from this 15-member organization. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger last week decided to withdraw from the 15-member Ecowas community. And how did we get to this point with this organization? Fellows, this started about 3 years ago with these three countries having new leaders through coup d'etats. But from what I have read with regards to the Ecowas Charter, there's nothing in that charter that mandates or gives authority to the 50-member Economic Community of West African States the right to interfere in the internal affairs of a sovereign member state. There is nowhere in their charter that says that ECOWAS has the right to interfere in the domestic political affairs of a member state. And the only thing that comes close, which was established with regards to ECOMAC, is when you have a civil war or something going on, where they can assemble a force that can bring about peace among the warring factions. That is the only thing that is close. But the ECOWAS has now become like the, democracy police in West Africa. As much as I strongly believe in democratic governments, because I've always made this argument, that democracy and capitalism work hand in hand. You can never have a great capitalist society without a great democratic society. It's never going to work. So I strongly believe in democratic governments because I'm a staunch capitalist. And because of that, I strongly believe in true democracies. But the problem I have with this issue is that when you have sovereign countries having situations dealing with their internal situation within their countries, I don't think it is the right thing for any organization, whether it's the ECOWAS or United Nations or any other community organizations of countries, to involve itself in the internal affairs of a member state. And unfortunately, this is what the ECOWAS community of West Africa decided or tried to do last year when they threatened to invade Niger to restore the overthrown democratically elected president by the military. And that was the first mistake ECOWAS made. Like I stated earlier, there's nowhere in their charter that says that they have a right to involve themselves in the internal affairs of a sovereign country within this member organization. But they threatened Niger last year to invade Niger if Niger does not return the democratically elected president back to office. And that thing backfired. I did a segment last year and I talked about it, and I staunchly opposed that decision led by Nigeria through the president of Nigeria, Bola Tinubu. I staunchly opposed that on that principle. But this has also created a problem that has contributed to where we are today within that 50-member organization. As a matter of fact, there's no more a 50-member organization. I would say it's a 12-member organization because these three countries have officially decided to withdraw from this organization. But the problem doesn't lie just there. Because if you look at these three Sahel region countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, all these are former French colonies. And the decision that led to the planning of going to invade Niger to restore the deposed democratically elected president, did not just come from the member states. Because, you see, if you look at ECOWAS as an organization, to some extent, even the AU, the African Union, these organizations are founded by external countries. EU, America, Japan, or China. These organizations are funded by these countries, the European Union, America, Japan, and China. And because of that, they hold a lot of power on how these organizations have to administer their affairs internally. And this is where the problem stems from. I've always said, and I will say it again, as far as somebody funds you, as far as somebody gives you aid, they have the right to decide how you're going to live your life, what to do, who to talk to, and all that stuff. And that is what ECOWAS is all about. Because if you look at ECOWAS, the decision for them to talk about invading Niger had more to do with the French influence. And out of that, it created division with the Economic Committee of the African States. It created a big division within these states. And this eventually led to them imposing sanctions after sanctions on these three countries. And if you are one of these three countries, and you're looking at an organization that is supposed to bring about free access of trade, as well as movement of citizens from these various member countries, but in essence, you are being penalized or you are being sanctioned because of the decision made by the people, the citizens of your various African countries, then what use is that organization to you guys? Even though I'm staunchly against the decision for them to withdraw from ECOWAS, because I strongly believe that they should have stayed in ECOWAS and use their power within the economic community of West African states to bring about amendments to the organization's rules and regulations, or whatever they deem is not fair in that charter. Vis-a-vis that charter should never allow ECOWAS states to involve itself in the internal affairs of a sovereign country. This is something that could have been put in their constitution. Put it in their constitution so that member countries will know their organization has no right to involve itself in the domestic political affairs of any member country. So that is where I think they should have stayed in this organization and forced those changes. By the end, they decided to withdraw from this organization because they didn't see any benefit to their countries with regards to them staying in this organization. And this goes back also to remind me of the Brexit, how the British left the European Union. At the end of the day, the free movement of goods and services, as well as citizens within these 15-member states, was a good thing for the citizens of Burkina, Mali, and Niger. And that is what is really going to hurt these three countries. It's more about the citizens having access to the markets of the other 12 member states. But at the end of the day also, then if they are withdrawing from this organization, then they can also establish bilateral relationships with the other West African states that they have good relationship with. So they can solve that problem. But I think the best thing for them to have done was to stay in the organization as it is and argue for the implementation of new charter that will be cemented into the constitution of the ECOWAS charter. Whereas the constitution will state clearly that the ECOWAS states or the ECOWAS organization will never involve itself in internal or domestic political affairs of a sovereign country. And that is what it's supposed to be. Because if you look at most of these organizations like ECOWAS, the United Nations, or the League of Nations before the United Nations, these are all about interest. These are all about interest. And none of these organizations' charter has it in there that these organizations have the right to go into another country just because they don't like the politics, the domestic politics of a country. It doesn't exist in the UN Charter. It didn't exist even in the League of Nations Charter. And I don't think it exists in any charter that has countries coming together for economic purposes or movement of citizens and so on and so forth. So that was the first big mistake that the ECOWAS body did when they threatened Niger. When they threatened Niger to invade that country unless they install the deposed president. That was a big mistake. And that contributed to where we are today with the ECOWAS states. But at the end of the day, these three countries also have to realize that this is about dealing with Africa, and let's say specifically West Africa. And with regards to West African states, we have to look at what is good within our states that also serves our interest and purpose. This shouldn't be about European countries or African or West African countries. This should be about what is best for the citizens of West Africa as well as Africa. So I hope these three countries, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso leaders, will not fall into the old trap of aligning with a country just because they are friends with that country today and that country is enemies to another country today. Vis-a-vis Russia or China. It has to be in the best interest of their countries. So you have to align with America, align with France, align with Russia, align with China, align with any country as far as it is in the best interest of your country and you dictate the terms of any agreement that you sign with these countries that will end up benefiting the citizens of your various African countries. So even though you are withdrawing from this organization, don't let this become a stumbling block in terms of building alliances within West Africa as well as Africa and the rest of the world. As far as these alliances end up benefiting the citizens of your various African countries, then you have to do it. Because I remember going back like, 50, 70, 80 years ago, when the League of Nations was founded. I'll go back that far because the League of Nations is what preceded, eventually became the United Nations. And Ethiopia at that time was basically an independent African country. It had not been colonized. But Ethiopia being a member of the League of Nations at that time, and looking at that time when most African countries, almost every African country was under colonization by the Western countries. As a matter of fact, most of the countries around the world at that time were under colonization when the League of Nations was in place. So basically, you had mainly these Western countries, England, France, America, they controlled the League of Nations. It was a very small organization. And Italy, at that time, led by Mussolini, decided to invade Ethiopia. Ethiopia, being a member of League of Nations at that time, put that issue in front of the League of Nations. Guess what, fellas? It was England, who was a member of the League of Nations, that supplied Italy with weapons to invade and try to colonize Ethiopia. So why am I saying this? I'm just giving a history of when you are building alliances, you have to build alliances that will benefit your citizens. Because when you build alliances with these Western countries, that necessarily doesn't mean they will be there for you when you need them. And this is exactly what happened. Mussolini ended up invading Ethiopia with weapons and funds coming from England. Even though Ethiopia was also a member of the League of Nations. And Ethiopia had protested to the League of Nations. But did the League of Nations come on behalf of Ethiopia? No. Because at the end of the day, Ethiopia was an African country. It's an African country. And Africa being under colonization at that time, the League of Nations members itself were all colonizing masters at the time. So in essence, it doesn't even make sense for them to intervene in something that they were part of it at the time. Then eventually, the founding of the United Nations came in after the Second World War. So basically, if you look at these institutions, whether it is Ecowas, United Nations, or other groups all around the world, it's all about interest. The United Nations that you see today, when you talk about the 5 permanent members, which is the Security Council, they control the United Nations. It's not about other countries, it's about what benefits them. The 5 controlling members, China, France, England, Russia, and the United States, they decide what is important at the United Nations. It's not the other 100 or something countries. So at the end of the day, if you look at all these institutions, it's about their interest. That is what it is. So going back to the Economic Community of West African States issue, now it's about the interest of these 3 countries, not to rely on new friends, whether it's Russia, China, or Vietnam, or these Southeastern Asia countries. It has to be more about what is best for their citizens, and also still be able to involve themselves in trading, bilateral trade agreements with some of the West African countries within the West Africa or even Africa. It is unfortunate, but this is where it has come today. When you cannot even unite within a small 15-member association in West Africa. It's already disintegrated. Come on, fellas, what are we talking about? We talk about 15-member organization in West Africa. We cannot even unite for the benefit of our own citizens. And we've already started falling apart. How much more about the unity of the whole of Africa? That tells you exactly how daunting that will be. Because if we cannot work within our own communities and find solutions to our problems, but we're going to let outsiders dictate to us what we need to do within our own systems, then this is what is going to happen. Because at the end of the day, these organizations are not funded by our member countries. They are funded by the European Union, the French, Britain, Germany, America, Japan, China. So as far as you have these countries funding your organizations, fellows, I'm sorry. You are not independent. You cannot make sound decisions that will go against their interest. Because at the end of the day, they are the ones giving you the money to operate these organizations. So they have to tell you to do things that will benefit them. And this is what led to the issue of invading Niger by the Ecowas organization. Because the issue of invading Niger had more to do with the European Union as well as the French. And as far as they give you money, as far as they keep funding you, either listen to them or you give them their money back and you start to fund yourselves. But unfortunately, because we have corrupt systems within our various African countries, because our governments are corrupt, because they live off of some of this money that comes from outside, they cannot let it go. Because they live off of this money, they cannot let it go. Instead of us coming together and using the little resources that we have to fund this organization so we can control our own affairs, we cannot do that because they need the money from external affairs. So they can steal some of the money, use it for themselves, and at the same time, use the corrupt system to keep themselves in power. And that is where the problem is. That is where the problem is. So if you look at the underlying factor of the problem that the Economic Community of West African States are going to face, it can never be solved as far as we always rely on external countries, European Union, China, Japan, America, to fund this. I mean, this goes to the African Union as well, the AU. The AU doesn't have enough money to fund itself. So at the end of the day, AU decisions are also controlled by external countries. It's the same thing. The system is corrupt. The AU leadership is corrupt. The presidents who head AU every year, they're also corrupt. So at the end of the day, what do? They cannot do anything but rather accept everything that comes from the powers that fund these organizations. And this is the problem these West African states are facing and are going to face. It's never going to be solved unless you start funding these programs ourselves. In Africa, we are always going to be influenced by the West. And the decisions that are going to be made by our leaders are not going to be decisions that will benefit our various African countries, but rather decisions that are going to benefit the Western countries. Because at the end of the day, they control these leaders. These leaders are just stooges down there, fellas. Let's face it. Let's be real here. I mean, if you don't have money, I'm sorry. I mean, if you don't have money and you want to live big, you got to find somebody to fund you. And that person funding you is also going to control what you do. And that is what this whole thing is about. You know, the problem is we African leaders, our corrupt African leaders, steal our resources as well as our wealth, shared among themselves and their crony capitalist friends at the detriment of their own fellow African citizens. And that is what they've been doing. So every time they get opportunity to get funding from outside, they will have to take that. Because that becomes an easy money for them. Another source of corrupt money that they can use to benefit themselves. I mean, we spend millions of dollars every year in Africa importing luxury cars for our ministers, government officials, and all that crap. But we cannot even have money to fund our own organization that we can use to make decisions that will benefit our own citizens, fellows. We should be ashamed of ourselves. And that is what it is. We can spend money foolishly on importation of luxury cars that we don't have money for. But we cannot spend that money to even develop our own continent. It's sad, fellows. And this is the kind of leadership that we have in Africa. So, fellows, I'm going to end here and say this. If it's Sunday, it's the Africa Weekly Talk. God bless you guys and have a great week. Peace and love.